The plains of New Mexico stretched endless beneath the burning sun. Dust devils swirled like restless spirits across the land. A lone cowboy rode through that silence, and his name was Eli Cade, a man shaped by hardship and silence. His coat was faded, his hat bent from years of wind and rain, and his horse Dustfoot bore the tired grace of one who had crossed deserts and wars beside him. Eli wasn't riding anywhere in particular. That's what he told himself anyway. Since the end of the war, he'd been drifting from one small town to another, fixing fences, breaking horses, living off what the land allowed. The West didn't ask questions, and Eli had long stopped answering any. That evening, as the sky bled gold and violet, Eli noticed something unusual near the dry creek bed. A small bundle lay beneath a dying mesquite tree. At first he thought it was a coyote carcass, but when he dismounted and came closer, he froze. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, thin as a reed, his skin bronze and cracked with dust. His clothes, made of torn buckskin, were stiff with dirt and blood. A small hand clutched a feather charm against his chest. Eli knelt, seeing the faint rise and fall of the boy's chest. "Hey now," Eli murmured, his voice a low rasp. "You still with me, kid?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came. His eyes, dark and wide, flickered open, wild with fear. Eli reached into his saddlebag, tore a strip of jerky, and placed it near the boy's mouth. The child hesitated, then grabbed it with trembling fingers, devouring it like a starving wolf. Eli offered his canteen next. The boy drank until he coughed, water spilling down his chin. Eli looked around the barren land. There were no footprints except the faint ones leading west, small, bare ones like the boy had been running. He recognized those tracks. They weren't from a ranch or settlement. They were Apache, Eli sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Hell," he muttered, knowing what this meant. The boy wasn't just lost, he was probably hunted or exiled or worse. He lifted the boy gently, wrapping him in his worn blanket. "You'll freeze if I leave you out here, kid." Dustfoot snorted as Eli swung the child up before him, the little one leaning weakly against his chest. By the time they reached Eli's small barn near the San Pedro crossing, the stars had begun to prick the darkening sky. The barn was simple, just a roof of warped wood, a corral, and a shack he called home. It wasn't much, but it was safe. He built a fire, laid the boy near the warmth, and cooked a bit of beans and cornmeal. The boy wouldn't speak. He flinched at every sound, every shadow. But Eli didn't press him. Instead, he told stories, not to be kind, but because the silence reminded him too much of old battlefields. "Used to be," Eli said quietly. "I rode with men who thought the world could be tamed with bullets and whiskey. Turns out the world had other plans." He chuckled softly, mostly to himself. The boy didn't respond, but his eyes flicked toward Eli for the first time, studying him. When the fire burned low, the boy finally whispered a single word. "Taza." "That your name?" Eli asked. The boy nodded faintly. "Well, Taza," Eli said, tipping his hat with a half-smile, "you're safe here tonight." Eli didn't sleep much. He stayed by the fire, cleaning his old rifle, listening to the wind scrape across the barn walls. He had the feeling someone was out there, maybe a scout, maybe worse. But he wasn't the kind to leave a starving child to die, no matter whose blood ran in his veins. At dawn, Taza stirred. Eli offered him more food, but before the boy could take it, his eyes widened. He pointed toward the hills, whispering a word Eli didn't understand. Something sharp, urgent. Then Eli heard it too, the low thunder of hooves. He stepped outside, rifle in hand. Across the ridge, rising with the morning sun, rode a line of Apache warriors. Dozens, then hundreds, their silhouettes dark against the light. They came in silence, painted for war, lances raised, feathers glinting like fire. At their front rode a tall man with a white eagle feather in his hair. Taza ran past Eli, calling out in his language. The warrior at the front reined in his horse, eyes fixed on Eli. He dismounted slowly, every movement precise, controlled. His gaze went from the boy to the cowboy. Eli didn't move. He lowered his rifle and met the man's stare. He had seen that kind of look before, the kind that measured a man's soul before deciding if he lived or died. The warrior spoke in slow, careful English. "You found my son." Eli blinked, then looked down at Taza. The boy clung to his father's leg, his small hand still holding the feather charm. "Didn't know he was yours," Eli said. "Just found him half dead in the creek bed." The warrior studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he raised his hand, and behind him 200 Apache warriors formed a line outside Eli's barn, silent as stone. It wasn't a threat. It was something else, a statement maybe, or a test. Taza's father stepped closer. "You gave food. You gave water. You did not kill him?" He paused, eyes narrowing. "Many white men would have." Eli exhaled slowly. "Kid was starving. Didn't seem right to let him die." The warrior nodded once. "You have done what most would not. For that we come not for war, but for honor." Eli frowned. "Honor?" The man gestured to his riders. "My people saw smoke from your fire. They come to see the white man who helped the son of Chief Nantan Loma." Eli's grip on his rifle loosened. "Well, Chief, I wasn't looking for thanks." The chief gave a thin smile. "And that is why you will have it." The Apache warriors dismounted in perfect unison, forming a semicircle around Eli's barn. One by one, they laid small offerings before the door. Feathers, beads, a bowstring, even a carved stone. Then they mounted again and rode off, leaving only the chief, Taza, and Eli beneath the rising sun. Chief Nantan looked at Eli and said quietly, "You have made a friend among the Chiricahua. Should you ever need us, look to the mountains." Then he turned to leave. But before he went, Taza ran back to Eli and pressed the feather charm into his hand. "For you," he said softly. Eli wanted to say something, maybe thank you, maybe goodbye, but the words stuck in his throat. He just nodded, watching as the boy rode away, the morning wind carrying dust and echoes across the plain. When the last rider disappeared over the horizon, Eli stood alone by his barn, the feather warm in his palm. He didn't know that this single act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would test everything he believed about right, wrong, and the fragile peace between two worlds. The morning after the warriors rode away, Eli Cade sat on the porch of his cabin, turning the feather charm over in his hands. The dawn wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of rain that never seemed to come. The land was thirsty, and so was Eli's soul, though he didn't yet know for what. The charm was simple, a white eagle feather bound by a strip of leather, decorated with tiny turquoise beads. Yet there was something about it that pulled at him. It wasn't just gratitude. It felt like a promise. He tied it to the handle of his rifle, not for luck, but as a quiet reminder that there were still things worth saving in the world. That week, he went about his usual life. He mended fences for the neighboring ranchers, sold a few horses in town, and kept mostly to himself. The folks in San Pedro Crossing didn't ask questions, but word spread fast in the desert. By the end of the week, people were whispering that Eli Cade had been visited by an Apache army. The local barkeep, Hank Laramie, grinned when Eli walked in for a whiskey. "Heard you made yourself chief of something, Cade," he said. 200 painted devils at your doorstep and they left you standing? Can't say most men would live to tell it." Eli sipped his drink. "I gave a hungry kid some food. That's all there is to it." But Hank leaned in, lowering his voice. "Not to them. You did something sacred, Eli. Apache don't forget debts. You might have just made yourself part of something bigger than you want." Eli didn't answer. He stared at his reflection in the amber glass, wondering if Hank was right. That night, as the wind howled across the plains, Eli dreamed. He saw Taza again, the boy standing beside a river of fire calling his name in the Apache tongue. When Eli tried to reach him, the ground cracked and 1,000 hoofbeats thundered between them. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound still echoing in his ears. For days afterward, the world seemed strangely still. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he noticed smoke rising far to the east, thick, black, not from a campfire. He rode out before dawn, his rifle slung across his back, the feather charm swaying in the wind. The prairie stretched endless and empty until he reached the edge of a burned-out settlement, a trading post and 2 wagons reduced to ash. A wagon wheel still smoldered. He could smell gunpowder and grief. He found signs of a fight, boot prints, broken arrows, and blood. Among the debris, he spotted something that made his chest tighten, a leather satchel marked with the Army's insignia. The soldiers had been here. He found no bodies of settlers, only Apache tracks leading away, and in the distance, vultures circling. It didn't take much to piece it together. Soldiers had attacked an Apache camp or maybe raided a hunting party, and the Apache had struck back. The same war that had never really ended, just gone quiet for a while. Eli crouched by a fallen arrow, the tip stained dark. He recognized the markings, Chiricahua Apache. Chief Nantan's tribe. He clenched his jaw. The boy's father. The one who had spared him. Eli rode hard for home, his mind tangled in memories of war. He'd seen this before. Men killing because they were told to, because it was easier to hate what they didn't understand. And every time it ended the same way. Mothers burying sons, land turned to graves. When he reached his barn, he found someone waiting for him. A figure stepped from the shadows, a young woman, wrapped in a worn serape, her face smudged with dust. She raised her hands slowly, showing she was unarmed. Her eyes were sharp, wary, but not afraid. "You are Eli Cade?" she asked in careful English. He nodded. "That's me. You're a long way from where you belong." She hesitated, then said, "I am Nara, sister of Taza. My father sent me." Eli's heartbeat quickened. "Your father? The chief?" Nara nodded. "He remembers your kindness. He says you must come. The soldiers. They broke the treaty. They killed our scouts near the White Mesa. My father is ready for war, but he does not wish for it. He wants you to come speak for peace." Eli let out a slow breath. "Why me?" "Because he says the spirits favor you," she said simply. "Because you helped his son. And because the white soldiers will not listen to an Apache chief." Eli stared toward the horizon, where the mountains cut black against the stars. He'd sworn never to ride into another man's war again. But the boy's face flashed in his mind, the small hands clutching at life, the feather charm. He couldn't turn away now. "Tell your father I'll come," he said. Nara smiled faintly, not with joy but with relief. "He said you would." They rode at dawn, the desert cold and sharp. Nara guided him through canyons and narrow passes where red cliffs rose like walls of fire. She spoke little, though Eli caught her watching him sometimes, curious about this quiet cowboy who spoke less than the wind itself. On the third day, they reached the Apache camp, hidden deep in the mountains, surrounded by pine and stone. The air smelled of smoke and sage. Warriors watched Eli's every move, their hands never far from their bows. But Chief Nantan stood tall at the center, waiting. The chief greeted him with a nod. "Eli Cade, you kept the feather." Eli touched the charm tied to his rifle. "Didn't seem right to part with it." The chief smiled. "Then the spirits have kept their word." He led Eli to a fire circle. Around them sat elders, warriors, and the medicine man. Nantan's tone was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of loss. "The soldiers have taken our land again," he said. "They come for the silver in the hills. My people are ready to fight, but blood brings only more blood. I ask you, will you ride to their fort and speak for peace?" Eli stared into the fire. He had no reason to trust the army, not after what he'd seen. But he owed this man, this boy, this tribe that had shown him more honor than many of his own kind. He nodded. "I'll go, but they won't take kindly to an Apache messenger." "You will go alone," Nantan said, "and carry our words, not our weapons." Eli gave a crooked smile. "That's never stopped me before." The chief extended his hand, placing a folded hide in it, a message marked with tribal symbols. "This is our truth. Deliver it and you will have done more for peace than any treaty." As Eli mounted Dustfoot, Nara stepped forward, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Be careful," she whispered. "The white men do not always listen to those who speak softly." Eli tipped his hat. "Neither do the hard ones, but I keep talking anyway." He rode out beneath the moonlight, the feather charm fluttering like a ghost in the wind, carrying the fragile hope of two nations across a land that had forgotten mercy. The moon hung low over the desert when Eli Cade began his ride. The night air carried the scent of juniper and dust, and the wind whispered through the canyon walls like an old ghost singing a warning. He had ridden alone many times before, across war fronts, through ghost towns, into storms that tore the sky apart. But this felt different. This time he wasn't riding for gold or glory. He was riding for peace, and peace in the West was the rarest treasure of all. He had one goal: reach Fort Claiborne, the nearest army outpost, 3 days' ride east of the mountains. He carried Chief Nantan's message, rolled in deerskin and sealed with the mark of the Chiricahua. It was a plea, not a threat, a chance for words instead of bullets. But out here, words were fragile things. By sunrise, Eli reached the open plains. The land stretched like a sea of gold and bone, shimmering under the merciless sun. He didn't stop except to water Dustfoot and drink a little himself. The farther he rode, the heavier his heart felt. He knew too well how the army saw the Apaches, not as people, but as shadows to be erased. That night, as he camped under a starlit sky, he thought of Taza and Nara, their quiet dignity, the way they carried centuries of sorrow in their eyes. He remembered the way the chief had looked at him, like a man clinging to the last edge of hope. Eli had known hope once. It was a dangerous thing. It could save you, or kill you slower than a bullet. The next morning, a thin line of dust appeared on the horizon. Riders. Eli felt his chest tighten. He raised his spyglass and saw 4 horsemen in army coats, rifles slung over their shoulders. He could have turned away, but that would have meant cowardice. So he rode straight toward them, slow and steady. When the men noticed him, they reined in sharply. Their leader, a captain by his stripes, squinted and called out, "State your business, rider." Eli lifted his hat in greeting. "Name's Eli Cade. I'm heading to Fort Claiborne." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You ride alone?" "Always do." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "We've had Apache sightings near the mesa," the captain said. "You seen anything out there?" Eli met his gaze without flinching. "Only the wind and the bones it carries," the captain snorted. "You talk fancy for a drifter." Eli smiled faintly. "Been accused of worse." The men let him pass, though their eyes followed him like wolves. As he rode away, he heard one whisper, "Bet he's working with them savages." He didn't look back. By dusk, he reached the fort, a squat, sun-bleached structure of wood and stone, ringed by wagons and tired soldiers. The flag atop the watchtower hung limp, its colors faded by sand and time. The gates creaked open at his approach. Inside, the fort was alive with noise, horses being shod, soldiers cleaning rifles, the clang of pots from the mess tent. Eli dismounted slowly, feeling every eye on him. A sentry led him to the main building, where a stern-looking man sat behind a desk cluttered with maps and whiskey bottles. His uniform bore the insignia of a major. The officer didn't bother standing. "Name?" "Eli Cade. Used to ride with the 4th Cavalry out of Texas." The major's brow lifted. "That so? You here to re-enlist?" "No, sir. I'm here to deliver a message." That caught the man's attention. "From who?" Eli placed the rolled hide on the desk. "From Chief Nantan Loma of the Chiricahua Apache." The room went still. The major stared at the message as if it were a rattlesnake coiled to strike. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you rode here carrying words from the same savages who burned a supply post and killed 4 of my men last week?" Eli kept his tone even. "I'm telling you, they want peace. The chief says he didn't order those attacks. Says your boys broke the treaty first." The major rose, his face hard. "You got a lot of nerve bringing that into my fort?" Eli met his gaze. "Ain't nerves, Major, just truth. You can burn it, ignore it, or listen to it. Your choice." The officer studied him for a long moment, then snatched up the hide and unrolled it. His lips moved as he read the Apache markings, translating with effort. When he finished, he sighed and poured himself a drink. "You think these people understand peace, Cade? You think if we sit down and sing songs, they'll stop raiding our wagon trains? I think if you keep killing their scouts, you'll never see peace again." The major slammed his glass down. "You forget who you're talking to." Eli's eyes hardened. "No, sir. I remember. I fought under men just like you. Watched them torch villages and call it victory." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Finally, the major turned away. "I'll send a rider with your message to the territorial governor," he muttered. "You've done your duty. Now get out of my fort." Eli nodded slowly. "Duty ain't why I came." He turned to leave, but a young lieutenant stepped forward. Lean, nervous, barely 20. "Sir," he said, "if I may, and reports came in from the East Trail. Apache scouts have been spotted again near Cade's route back." The major smirked. "Well then, looks like our messenger might find his friend sooner than he wants." Eli ignored the jab, tipping his hat. "Appreciate the warning." That night, Eli didn't stay within the fort walls. He camped just beyond the perimeter near the riverbed. The soldiers' laughter echoed faintly behind him, but he preferred the company of silence. He lit a small fire, cooking beans as the feather charm swayed gently from his rifle. For a moment, he thought of leaving, of heading north, away from all this. But then he remembered Nara's voice. The white men do not always listen to those who speak softly. If he didn't go back, the chief would think the army refused peace. and war would come by dawn. He couldn't let that happen. Not after all he'd seen. So before first light, he saddled Dustfoot and began the long ride west, back through the plains and canyons. The morning was eerily quiet. Even the birds were still. By noon, he reached the dry gorge near the White Mesa, and that's when he saw the smoke. He spurred Dustfoot forward, heart pounding. The smoke rose from the western ridge, the direction of the Apache camp. His worst fear clawed through him. He crested the hill and froze. Below him, the ground burned. The Apache camp lay in ruins, teepees shattered, the air thick with ash. The soldiers had come before him. There was no peace, no warning, and only fire. Eli dismounted and ran through the wreckage, shouting names. Nantan, Taza, Nara. But the wind gave no answer. Only the crackle of dying flames. Among the ashes, he found a familiar object, a small turquoise bead half buried in the dirt. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. Nara's necklace. She had been here. He fell to his knees, the heat from the embers searing his palms. He had tried to be the bridge between two worlds, but both sides had already burned it down. In the distance, a lone figure limped toward him through the smoke. It was Taza, alive but wounded, his face streaked with soot and blood. Eli ran to him, catching him before he fell. The boy clutched at Eli's coat, whispering hoarsely, "They came before sunrise, soldiers. Took my sister." Eli's jaw tightened. His voice came out rough as gravel. "Where?" Taza pointed toward the east and toward the fort. His small hand shook. "Please, save her." Eli lifted him gently, carrying him from the burning camp. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something fierce. Not vengeance. Not rage, but the cold, determined fire of a man who'd made a promise. He laid Taza on Dustfoot, covered him with a blanket, and whispered, "You hang on, kid. I'm getting her back." Then he mounted up, turned his horse toward the rising sun, and rode hard, faster than the wind, faster than grief, back toward Fort Claiborne. This time, he wasn't carrying words. He was carrying justice. The sun had not yet risen when Eli Cade rode back toward Fort Claiborne. The sky was a bruised purple, the land quiet except for the thud of Dustfoot's hooves hammering the earth. Behind him, the burned remains of the Apache camp still smoldered, and the boy Taza lay wrapped in Eli's blanket, half-conscious, whispering his sister's name through cracked lips. Every mile cut deeper into Eli's chest. He had believed, foolishly, that words could mend what hatred had torn. He had carried a message of peace, and the soldiers had answered it with fire. Now they had Nara. The wind hissed through the grass like the breath of ghosts as Eli rode through the Badlands. He stopped only once, at a small creek, to pour water over Taza's burns. The boy stirred weakly, eyes barely open. "Hold on, son," Eli whispered. "You're stronger than you look." "I'll bring her back, you hear me?" Taza's small hand gripped his sleeve. "They said she fight them. Took her to the fort." Eli swallowed hard. "Then that's where I'm headed." He set the boy gently against a rock hidden in the shade. "You stay put, Taza, I'll come back for you." "You have my word." The boy nodded faintly, clutching the feather charm that once hung from Eli's rifle. He whispered something in Apache, a blessing maybe, or a farewell. Eli touched the boy's shoulder, then swung back into the saddle. The time for diplomacy had died in the ashes of that camp. What came next would be swift and certain. Fort Claiborne loomed in the distance like a scar against the desert. Smoke drifted from its chimneys, and the flag hung still under the heavy dawn. As Eli approached, the guards at the watchtower spotted him and raised rifles. "Halt. Identify yourself." Eli slowed Dustfoot but didn't stop. His voice carried cold and clear. "Name's Cade. You tell your major I'm coming in." The guards exchanged uneasy looks. "You're not cleared, Ryder." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then you better clear the way." He spurred Dustfoot hard. The horse surged forward. The guards shouted, "Too late." Eli ducked low as bullets whistled past. He crashed through the front gate in an explosion of splinters, the horse's hooves pounding on the dirt yard. Soldiers scrambled, shouting orders. Eli swung down and leveled his rifle before the nearest one could draw. "Where's the girl?" he barked. "The Apache girl you took from the mesa." The man hesitated, and that hesitation earned him the butt of Eli's rifle across the jaw. He crumpled. Another lunged forward, but Eli's gaze stopped him cold. From the barracks, Major Briggs stormed out, coat half-buttoned, pistol drawn. Cade! What in hell's name? Eli turned, eyes blazing. You burned that camp, didn't you? Briggs's jaw clenched. They were harboring raiders. They were women and children. Briggs's face hardened. War's not clean, son. Eli stepped forward, voice low but fierce. It was peace, Major. That's what it was supposed to be. The soldiers circled, rifles ready. Eli didn't raise his weapon as not yet. He just stared at Briggs with the kind of silence that weighed heavier than thunder. Where's the girl? Eli demanded again. Briggs's gaze flickered. She's being held, questioning. Where? He hesitated. Eli cocked the hammer. Don't make me ask a third time. Briggs exhaled through his nose, then nodded toward the stables. She's in the holding shed. Eli didn't thank him. He just walked past, rifle steady, boots grinding in the dirt. The soldiers didn't move. Something in his stride, calm, unbroken, told them they were looking at a man who'd already chosen his fate. He found Nara inside the shed, bound at the wrists, her face bruised but her eyes fierce as wildfire. Two guards stood watch. When they saw Eli enter, one reached for his gun. Eli didn't give him the chance. His rifle butt cracked across the man's temple and the second froze, terrified. Keys, Eli said. The soldier fumbled them from his belt. Eli unlocked Nara's chains and helped her stand. She swayed, weak but proud. You came back, she whispered. Eli nodded. Didn't plan on leaving anyone behind. Her gaze hardened. They killed many. I know. He paused. Your brother's alive. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Then we must go. They slipped out the back through the corral toward Dustfoot. But the alarm went up before they reached the gate. A shot cracked the air. Then another. Soldiers poured from the barracks like ants, rifles blazing. Eli pushed Nara toward the horse. Ride, go find your brother. I'll hold them. She shook her head. No, you'll die. Not if you ride fast enough. She hesitated, only a heartbeat. Then she swung up onto Dustfoot's back. Eli slapped the horse's flank. Ride west, go. The horse bolted through the gate, bullets sparking off the stones. Nara ducked low, disappearing into the rising dawn. Eli turned, drawing his revolver as the soldiers surrounded him. The world slowed. The whistle of wind, the thunder of boots, the hammer click of rifles. He fired once, twice, three times, a precise, controlled. Men dropped. Smoke filled the yard. He dove behind a wagon as a bullet tore through his sleeve. Briggs shouted orders, his voice drowned in chaos. Eli reloaded calmly, his mind cold and clear. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to buy time. Through the smoke, he saw Dustfoot's silhouette vanish over the ridge. Relief washed through him. She was safe. Taza might live. The promise would hold. He turned to face the fort one last time. The sun broke over the horizon, painting everything gold. Eli stepped into the light, blood streaking his arm, the feather charm fluttering from his rifle. He raised it, not to aim but to show the mark of the Apache chief still tied to its handle. Remember this, Briggs, he shouted. You can burn their homes, but you'll never break their honor. A bullet struck his side. He staggered, dropped to one knee, but his voice carried clear as thunder. And that's something a man like you'll never understand. He fired one last shot, straight through the fort's flag rope. The banner fell, its colors folding into the dirt. The soldiers froze. Eli collapsed beside it, the rifle slipping from his hand. His last breath carried the faintest smile. The feather charm drifted free, carried by the wind toward the mountains. By the time the soldiers reached him, the yard was silent. Briggs stood over Eli's still body, face pale. He looked down at the fallen man, the same one who had tried to bring peace to two worlds that never wanted it. Bury him, the major said quietly. Give him a marker. A young soldier asked, What should we write, sir? Briggs hesitated. His throat worked once. Then he said softly, Right. He rode for peace. Far to the west, Nara reached the hills as the sun rose. Dustfoot staggered, spent, but she urged him onward until she found Taza where Eli had left him. She fell beside him, clutching his hand. The boy pointed weakly toward the horizon. He's coming? Nara's lips trembled. Yes, she whispered. He's coming soon, but both of them knew the truth. They watched the morning light spill across the desert, and in that golden silence a single eagle feather drifted down from the sky, landing beside them. Taza picked it up, holding it close. He kept his word, he murmured, and Nara smiled through her tears. Yes, she said softly. He did. The dawn that followed the great night of fire was quiet. too quiet for a land that had just witnessed a storm of bullets, thunder, and blood. The wind moved across the plains like a ghostly lullaby, carrying the scent of smoke, iron, and wild sage. The sun rose in a pale orange haze, stretching its light across the burned grass and the fallen remains of horses, arrows, and broken rifles. Amid the silence, a lone figure stood, the cowboy, battered but alive, with dust clinging to his coat and a faint tremor in his hand as he leaned on his Winchester for support. The barn was half burned, its roof caved in, but the land still stood. The child he had saved, a little sparrow, sat beside a wounded warrior, eyes wide, face streaked with ash and tears. Around them, the Apache survivors moved silently, gathering their wounded, tending to their fallen with the reverence of a people who understood that death was only another trail beyond the horizon. The cowboy took a slow step forward, his boots sinking into the blackened earth. His shoulder bled through his shirt where an arrow had grazed him, but he said nothing. His gaze met that of the Apache chief, White Hawk, who stood tall even in grief, his long hair tied with a single red feather. Between them, the silence was heavy, sacred, born of shared loss and reluctant respect. "You fought like a man with a heart too big for one side," the chief said finally, his voice hoarse but steady. "You protected our child when the white men would have let him die. For that we will not forget." The cowboy nodded, his jaw tight. "I didn't do it for sides," he said quietly. "A hungry child ain't an enemy. He's just a soul who deserved a chance." White Hawk looked at him for a long moment, then gave a nod of his own, the kind that only passes between men who've seen too much to need more words. Around them, the warriors began to mount their horses, carrying the wounded and wrapping the fallen in hides. Before leaving, Little Sparrow approached the cowboy. He held something small, a pendant carved from bone with the figure of a falcon etched into it. "My father says this keeps the spirit of courage," the boy said softly. "It belongs to you now." The cowboy crouched, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. He took the pendant and placed it in his palm, feeling its weight, not heavy but full of meaning. "You keep it," he said. "You'll need courage where you're going." But the boy shook his head, eyes bright through the soot and dust. "You already gave me mine." Something in the cowboy's chest broke then, not from pain but from the quiet ache of knowing that some good things come only once, and then ride away forever. He placed a hand on the boy's head, nodded once, and stood. As the Apaches rode away, their silhouettes disappearing into the rising sun, the cowboy stood alone amid the smoking land. The silence that followed was immense, the kind of silence that only comes after chaos, when every living thing is listening to the ghosts. He turned toward the barn. Inside, his horse neighed softly, miraculously unharmed. He stroked its mane, whispering words only the wind could hear. "We're still here, old boy. Guess that means something." He took one last look at the horizon, the trail where the Apache riders had vanished. A small figure, Little Sparrow, turned once in the distance, lifted a hand in farewell, and then was gone. For a moment, the cowboy allowed himself to imagine another world, one where men didn't fight over color or land, one where a hungry child could knock on any door and be fed. But that wasn't the world of 1883. The frontier was wide, merciless, and beautiful. And the men who survived it learned to carry both sorrow and pride like the same coin in their pocket. He mounted his horse, his body sore and his soul heavier than before. The land around him stretched endless, golden plains turning silver beneath the morning sun. He didn't know where he was headed next. Maybe south toward Texas, where the rivers ran red with clay. Maybe north to the mountains, where a man could lose himself in snow and silence. But before leaving, he reached into his pocket and took out something, the bone pendant. He tied it to his saddle horn, where it would swing with every step of the journey. "Ride easy, kid," he murmured to the wind. "You and your people will be just fine." Then he kicked his heel gently, and the horse began to move on one slow step, then another. The wind rose again, soft and warm, as if the plains themselves were whispering their farewell. The cowboy didn't look back. Behind him, the barn stood as a black silhouette against the morning, a scar on the land, but also a mark of defiance. The place where a single act of mercy had bridged two worlds, if only for a heartbeat in history. Days later, a trader passing through would find the ruins. He'd hear rumors of a white man who stood with Apaches against a band of bounty hunters, a man who vanished afterward into the desert. Some said he died. Others said he rode on to Mexico chasing no one but his own shadow. But the Apaches told it differently. Around campfires they spoke of the lone hand, the white man who shared bread with their child and stood when others would have fled. They said his spirit rode with the falcon now, watching the plains forever, guarding those who were lost and hungry, and somewhere, under the endless sky of the Old West, a rider moved toward the horizon. Where the light met the dust, a man carrying not glory, but a story, the kind that would echo in the wind for generations.